Sometimes we have a momentary contact with some young person that we don't think we mentored them, but they got an insight or took a note or spotted something. Mentorship doesn't have to be a handshake, a written agreement, a scheduled appointment.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Weiss. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Our guest today, Kathy Sullivan, is the first American woman to walk in space, more recently, the first woman to dive to the deepest point on Earth, and author of a sensational book called Handprints on Hubble by MIT Press. Welcome to Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher. I was using rougher just because I saw a roof on your lap. Kathy Sullivan. Kathy, for people who are only hearing us, if they hear some growling, it's not you, it's your dog.
That's correct. I have young Murphy sitting on my lap in hopes that that'll prevent squirrel chases and other louder noises.
Now, young Murphy is a fairly recent addition to your home. Is this true?
Late 2018, because frankly, with my travel and work patterns of years past, if I'd gotten the dog before that, I'm pretty sure the dog would have had the SPCA sue me for neglect.
Yeah, it's like when people called child services because you're not around your kids enough. I grew up with dogs, and we're having that discussion in our household now. We have 2 adopted cats, which are very easy to take care of. But, once you sort of go to the dog mode, it does change your plans quite a bit.
Yes. Well, dogs really need, friends and lovers, and cats only need servants.
Oh, that is so true. So, Kathy, this spring, I have to admit, you caught the exploration and science world a little by surprise by your trip to the deepest point in the ocean with Victor Vescovo. You pulled it off. I only heard about it maybe a week before you were about to leave.
Yeah, well, Victor had emailed me quite out of the blue. We didn't know each other. We had never met. I guess it was around, I'm going to say late October or November of 18, and said he was, of 19, and said he was going back to the Challenger Deep in 2020. And he wanted to take some notable people to interesting deep points in the ocean. And he thought it was really time a woman reached full ocean depth. And he had decided that should be me. So from, let's say that was November of 19 forward into 20, the expedition was on and then getting a little more complex, and COVID starts to hit really last week of February, first week of March is when I remember you feeling the virus sort of nipping at my heels. By mid-March, everything had been on my extraordinarily busy calendar through June had evaporated, like I think everybody else's. Victor managed to get the arrangements made, and he and his team, for the ship to continue on, and she got into Guam. And testing regimes were coming along well enough. So the deal was, a pod of us met in Arizona, where there was a rapid turnaround testing lab that could handle, I think it was the 6 of us that went through. We flew in one day, got tested the next morning, had results by that supper time, got on a crack of dawn airplane the next day and headed out through Hawaii to Guam. It was a bit of a challenge, and it was eerie, odd in all the airports, of course, because airports that, if you're familiar with them, you're familiar with navigating, feeling like a salmon swimming upstream in the concourses, Honolulu and Tokyo Narita, and they were ghost towns, total ghost towns.
So, Kathy, I'm kind of curious. You had to have been vetted by somebody because, let's face it, when you go on an expedition, you got to choose your partner as well. I know that you are friends with Don Walsh, the first man to go down to the deepest point. And I'm assuming he's friends with Victor Vescovo. Was there any of Don interceding and saying, hey, Kathy's solid? I mean, there's got to be some vetting because this is so different from the astronaut program where you really look through psychological training and screening people.
Yeah, I honestly don't know all the details. Don certainly did already know Victor. He'd been out at sea for the Challenger Deep leg of the 5 Deeps expedition in 2019. When I asked Victor about that, well, when we were actually in the submersible heading down, what Victor said was, as he realized that was something he wanted to do. I mean, remember, he now knows Don Walsh and he knows people in the deep sea arena, from academics to the submersible manufacturers at Triton and the designers. And Victor said he just started asking around through the network of people he now was acquainted with. If I was going to do this and take the first woman, who should be the first woman to the Challenger Deep? Whether he's circled back around with someone like Dawn, who does know me pretty well, and asked if she was, squared away, or, is she going to be okay at sea? I don't know. He just said, everyone was coming up with your name. So we swapped a couple of emails. He knows I have a Navy background as well, so I've got a lot of operational experience. But I honestly don't know, how much of my background he pulled and how much he worried about that.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. There had to be a certain giddiness about it. You describe it as a spy novel, but let's face it, when you're invited to go on a really cool trip anywhere, there's always that excitement of, where the brain goes and sort of the planning on that. It had to have, that had to be a refreshing feel for you.
Well, my brain went a couple of places. Of course, the first phase of all this is happening before COVID is in anybody's awareness. So my very first thing was, I had not followed the 5 Deeps expedition all that carefully. I knew Victor had succeeded. So, this is a pretty squared away outfit if they can pull off those 5 dives. But my first thought went to calling Don Walsh, who I knew had been at sea with them. And there was a bit of reverse vetting too. This is a well-to-do adventurer, right? And some of those guys are really squared away and solid, and some of them are, not as squared away and solid. So who's this guy Victor? And he and the team, do they really have their act together? Is the operations, the design is clearly robust and safe, given the number of dives it's already done. But how about shipboard operations? And, handling a sub over the side can be a very dicey thing in any kind of sea condition. So I don't know how much Victor checked me out, and I certainly didn't, pull FBI files on him. But I asked around, because you're going to be at sea for 10 days in a small craft for a dozen hours. And
I would have to say, and, just purely from a professional standpoint and looking at backgrounds, you both have probably the most incredible resumes that I've seen. And, Victor is Stanford, MIT, Harvard Business School, climbed Everest. He's a pretty accomplished guy, similar military background to you. There had to be at least that kind of meeting of the mind. This is a pretty substantial person.
Oh, I think once we finally met, I certainly felt a very, very quick, solid rapport. I think some of it is sort of the confidence in the shared characteristics of someone who has succeeded at that kind of list of achievements as he's done. And I suspect he could recognize the same in me. But there also was just a lot of, I think, we're ops geeks, we're analytical types, we're just pretty straightforward. Neither of us actually is any kind of huge overweening ego. So it clicked really nicely. It was a delight to be at sea with him, and we've stayed in touch. So I'm happy to consider him a friend at this point.
Just my gut feeling of looking at the operation, comparing this to your first flight into space versus that, I would imagine that you're probably a little more relaxed as a person, just sort of on the nature of what you're doing. I think there's got to be a difference between sitting on a rocket that can explode and there's a calculable chance versus going down in a sub that seems to have a pretty good safety record.
Yeah, they're very different, risk environments in a lot of ways. I think definitely the explosive potential of getting off this planet is, that's clearly the most viscerally daunting kind of thing. It's that things are going to go really bad, really fast if something starts going bad there. And deep submersible dive is more of an elevator ride than a bomb. So, but the other big factor for me was I had really substantial responsibilities for the operation of the vehicle and the operation of equipment aboard it on the space shuttle. And the Victor submersible is a certified single pilot craft. So really, all I needed to do was be good company. Be prepared to operate the manipulator arm, make some useful observations. So in terms of intellectual burden and everything else, it was kind of go along for the ride and be good company.
Just so people know, that's not me actually growling at Kathy. That's a dog showing it just pleasure of having it while it's walk time. Kathy, I loved your book, Handprints on Hubble. And the part I found it refreshingly accessible. And what I found so wonderful about it was, right now people look at the Kathy Sullivan American hero, but it didn't start that way. Everybody takes a first step. And your first step started in Paterson, New Jersey. And, you didn't grow up with a silver spoon in your mouth, and you had challenges right from the start.
As everybody does. It's about becoming something with your life, not about sort of plopping into it. You don't get beamed into being 60 or 70. You have to walk every step of that. That's both the challenge and the fun and the opportunity of it. I was not silver spoon kid by any means, but a comfortable family and very good health, supportive parents. So an upbringing that let me be adventurous and curious, that went a long way to inoculating me against peer pressures and opinions that often start to swirl around in everybody's head in their teen years, but in particular that can beset teenage girls and push them into, don't be too smart or don't, the main thing is be popular. So pull back on your potential. And I kind of blasted through more of that than maybe some do. But I did always feel, a freedom to explore anything that interested me. And I think the little small baby steps in learning how to tackle a new challenge that our parents made available to us, I think there's a parallel to working out at the gym here, believe it or not, because I think if you can start with little steps, small risks like, can I get my tricycle to the corner and back, and gain some confidence and learn the mental processes that are going into that, the more of that you can do, the more you're prepared for a next challenge or a next one beyond that. You gain a strength and an agility, and you gain a confidence that lets you take on different challenges and larger challenges.
Did you find in your case, you had to have been a great student? Is that where you sort of found your security blanket?
I did always love reading. And I was just insatiably curious. So school to me was something I had to do, but it was also kind of a smorgasbord of things I didn't know that were being served up to me. And it was fun to take them in. But, those pressures, I think it was sixth grade. I can remember fifth or sixth grade. I can remember pretty vividly. I'm pretty sure it was a geometry class, which I found to be great, fun puzzle solving. And so I would, I think, always eagerly have my hand in the air when the teacher asked a question. And I can remember very vividly one particular day where I threw my hand up in the air and suddenly realized it was clearly not really welcome among the other kids in this class that my hand was always in the air. And it was this is feeling not comfortable suddenly to stand out by always having my hand in the air. And I pretty well stopped putting my hand in the air at that point, but I was just stubborn enough that I answered every question in my own head. So I didn't shut down. I just said, great, I don't need to signal to you guys that I'm liking this and I'm having fun with it, but I'm going to keep grabbing every bit of learning I can. I'm going to keep challenging myself on every question I can. And if it's bugging you that I'm overly eager about it, yeah, I can hide that for you and carry on, but I'm not stopping.
So you were getting your PhD in Canada, I believe in Halifax. When you applied for the space program, how did you first know you made it in? Was it a phone call, a letter?
The announcements about our selection were made by the big boss that was going to be our big boss when we all showed up in Houston. The typical pattern of let's call all these people before the press release hits, on whatever day that was in January of 1978. I was living in Halifax, Nova Scotia at the time. And the important part of that is that Halifax is 1 hour ahead of East Coast time. So NASA, of course, has this whole press release timed to whatever time it was, East Coast time. And this guy has 35 people to call that are scattered certainly across all of the United States. And I think one or two were in Europe. Someone was far out in the Pacific with the military. I'm told I got the first phone call because I was up earliest, being an hour ahead of all the other American folks. So, when you're rooming in a small, cheap apartment with three other gals because you're all broke, and it's the 1970s, there's one phone in the hallway. And I think for all of us, parents never called us because they never knew where we would be. So it was really only ever outbound calls. So you can imagine that phone rings unexpectedly at 7:30 in the morning. And all of us stuck our heads out of our bedroom, I think, wondering whose family's got an emergency. I mean, it was this has got to be bad news. One of my roommates picked it up. Next thing I know, she's got her hand over the speaker part of the handset, and she's looking at me with these saucer-sized eyes and sort of mouths. It's for you. It's someone from NASA. So that's how I found out.
Come on, Kathy. I know you're such a low-key person on everything you do, but even for the most low-key person, that's got to be the words that your knees get weak over.
It was really funny. The guy, you'd have to appreciate the character who was making these calls. He is one of the most, you think I'm low-key. This guy speaks low and speaks slow, and he's got the least inflection in his voice under any circumstance of anybody I've ever met. And so he says, "Hi, this is George Abbey," and the wheels are kind of turning, and I'm oh yeah, that's right, because it's been months ago. It's months ago that this interview happened, and in this very stunningly laconic way, he literally said, "Well, I'm calling to just see if you're still interested in coming to work for us." And my reaction was, "You're offering me something that's turning my life, I don't even know how, it's utterly transforming my life in ways I know I can't imagine. And you sound about as excited as the grocery store manager." It was just, the cognitive dissonance was just huge. And every one of my classmates who's ever talked about or written it has very much the same experience. Life is, a hand grenade just went off and your life is falling into new pieces. And this guy just sounds like a grocery store manager.
So you hang up the phone. What's the first words you say? Come on, Kathy.
I don't remember I'm sure my roommates were all out in the hallway. I suspect what I said was, "I'm in," because they knew the story. They knew what had been happening. We talked a bit between the interview back in November and now about, what did I really want it? Could I really do it? All that kind of stuff. So they knew that I was hoping I would get it, kind of hoping, but not daring to hope that I would get it. So probably all I said was, "I'm in." So the next thing I was really utterly unprepared for was the explosion in the press. I suspect it was 11 o'clock in Halifax, probably was at 10 a.m. press release. And all of the Canadian press just goes bonkers. One of these, "This is super big news, new astronauts. Oh man, and one of them's living with us," kind of thing. So it was quite a circus in my laboratory for the whole rest of that day.
Who was the first person you called up to tell the news?
All the rest of that day is a total blur. It's 4:30 in the morning where my parents are living. So I'm quite sure I did not call them at 4:30 in the morning. And
I would have.
But that's what I worked on, is getting through to them so that they wouldn't be surprised by a press release and they would hear it from me.
Look, for every kid, that's the best feeling in the world. Come on, to call up your parents with that kind of news, because your parents, you always seek your parents' approval, and to say, "I've got it," has got to be a wonderful moment.
Well, yeah, we'd had a couple of conversations along the way in the selection process that were along that same line. I mean, as excited as they were for me to be applying, my mother in particular was just a little bit daunted that when her daughter finishes grad school, she's either going 6,000 feet deep in the ocean in a submersible or 200 miles up in a spaceship. But I'm sure she wished I'd found something exciting on the surface instead.
But your dad was in the aerospace industry, so he's got to sort of have an understanding of the process a little bit.
Well, I think not of the astronaut selection process. I think what was what's going through his mind is he knows too much, right? He knows how coveted and exclusive becoming an astronaut is, but he also knows all about how rockets blow up. So doesn't pay to know too much.
Yeah, I understand that. In fact, in your book, you mentioned that on launch day or soon before, you have the what if conversation. And I believe you had that with your father.
Yeah, I had it with either my father or my brother before every one of my flights. The incident that I write about in the book is with my dad before my third flight, because that walk was part of all the events that led to my switching gears and going from NASA over to NOAA. You not only have it with your immediate family or parents or siblings and spouses, but the astronaut office is like military squadrons. Every astronaut on a crew has another astronaut assigned to be their casualty assistance officer, which means if stuff goes really bad, I'm the one who's going to fetch your belongings and get to your family and help them, be their conduit for reliable information about what happened and all that stuff, and help them sort through the aftermath of you not coming home.
So you and I both know the three astronauts from the Apollo 11, and there had to be, at least I understand, there was competition to see who would be that first person, or at least an expectation. So your group had the first women astronauts. There had to be, in the back of your mind, or maybe it's artificial competition created, a little bit of curiosity or anxiety on who that first person to be picked, because that's a historic figure right away.
Yeah, well, it's clear that the six of us are the six that are being considered, and clear that one will go before the other five go. All the rest of the equation is not clear. It's pretty clear that the guy I mentioned before, George Abbey, is going to have a significant influence on the choice. Very unlikely that that's not going to be reviewed and maybe modified by others. But what's totally unclear, on what parameters are you being judged, by whom, and when? So it could be, and I think the way most of us felt is, in some sense, everything is part of the test. After hours softball is probably in some ways part of the test.
I had the pleasure of standing next to you 2 Marches ago when we had 8 Apollo astronauts, and I think about 24 other astronauts who people have been in space on stage. I always find the perspective of backstage so much more interesting than sitting in a seat, right? I get antsy sitting in a seat. I would imagine the world of exploration, the Apollo astronauts are the top of the pyramid. I mean, that's the biggest thing. You and I were next to each other, and literally these people brushed by us, the Buzz Aldrins, the Al Wardens, all of those people.
Mike Collins.
I enjoyed actually watching your expression as much as the audience, because you were there in a very quiet thing. We were behind them. And yet I did see, I have to admit, your eyes were moist. What was going through your mind at that point? Could you believe that you were there?
It was a really fabulous evening. And there were a couple things going through my mind. One was, these are my guys and this is my tribe. And just the pride in them and my affection for many of them. I know some of them better than others. So there was that. And there was still this, little kid in candy shop sense of, and how did it end up that I am now one of them? I'm not in the audience. I'm not just watching them on television. I moved from spectator to participant, a different chapter of the same grand adventure that they were in. And it was a spectacular opportunity to have. And wow, now I get to be on stage as the honorary chair of the Explorers Club, welcoming them as my friends and our guests. And how cool is that? And then, of course, one of my other special favorite moments was that one of the more recent astronauts accompanying them was Julie Payette from Canada, Canadian Space Agency, who at the time was the Governor General of Canada, which meant she's the chief executive of a country. So, the senior most figure in the room was this diminutive woman, Julie Payette. I gave her whole honorific title to the audience because she deserved to have that recognition mentioned in front of everybody there. So all of that was just super fun to me. The women arriving in a program, moving on, achieving leadership roles. These guys, all of whom are just been gracious and supportive to all of us young folks as we came up behind them. All of that was kind of flowing through my mind.
I keep quoting your book, but I think when you were a kid, you always said that reading was the first place that took you traveling. And you've got to pinch yourself a little bit, because from that little girl, that little tomboy, as you describe yourself, who grew up in the Sputnik era, you're the right age to see all of those things. And so now you read those books, and there are little girls, I know because I have a little girl and I have little boys, they are now traveling through you. I don't know if it ever hits the enormity of you or it's just part of your life now, but there's got to be a reflective moment and saying, wow, I was that little girl.
Those are really wonderful moments. And now and then you get a chance to touch a little more, meet a youngster after giving a talk or some correspondence. And I remember many years ago now, I exchanged a letter with a young Caribbean girl. Want to be an astronaut. Everyone laughs at me. I think she was early teens. It's kind of just what you would expect. And I don't remember exactly what I wrote back to her, but probably things like what I said about myself. Yeah, ignore them. They're the peanut gallery. No one gets to edit what you're interested in. And about 6 years later, she wrote me again to just check in with where she was. And she had carried on and she'd gotten to university and she was getting a technical degree. And she now saw other prospects for her career, hadn't given up on astronaut yet, but she wouldn't even have been there without that bit of encouragement from someone with some standing that said, no, carry on, carry on. And then probably my favorite story of that concerns another astronaut, Megan MacArthur, who was an undergrad at UCLA planning to go into aerospace engineering because she'd always wanted to be an astronaut. But then she found this submarine competition and she was really liking the marine sciences. And so when I meet her at this competition, she's betwixt and between about, will I lose the astronaut option if I go with the marine stuff? I do love that more. I absolutely do not remember. I mean, I sat and had a hot dog with her on a beach table for 30 minutes. And then I completely forgot that event until a mutual friend reminds me right before her first flight about that event on the beach. That 20-minute, 30-minute conversation was pivotal in Megan's decision-making. Megan and I have had this very fun bookend discussion several times. She would say, I mentored her. And I guess it was a moment of mentoring, but it was a flash. And I think all of us, Richard, you too, you're an accomplished explorer and media personality. And sometimes we have a momentary contact with some young person that we don't think we mentored them, but they took something from us. They got an insight or took a note or spotted something. And I think the more that we're aware, mentorship doesn't have to be a handshake, a written agreement, a scheduled appointment. Mentorship is simply being an example.
You're getting me all teary-eyed over here. Most people, when they see you at an official press conference, they see you at a black tie event. That story of you having a hot dog on the bench reminds me of a story, and I guarantee you won't even remember this, but you were speaking at the Explorers Club, I'll say in 2004 or so, and you spoke to the audience, and you could see the wait staff who are normally not looking at lectures, sort of craning their heads around the door. And I remember after your lecture, you went back to where they were bussing all the dishes and trays, and you took pictures with them. And you probably spent about a half hour talking to them. And I thought that was one of the most wonderful things, because for each one of those people, that was the highlight, I guarantee, of your year, the most famous person they'd ever met. And you spoke to them in a way that didn't make them feel lesser than you. And that's the Kathy Sullivan that I sort of want to leave the audience off with today. Kathy, you are such an accomplished person. You've done so much for so many people. The world is a better place for having you in it. So, Kathy, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
So did I, Richard. I look forward to having some time together in person in the future.
Absolutely. Now take that dog for a walk.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support. So make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.